Sorry, Susie.
All right.
Honestly, I'm not sure I do right tonight, but those that are joining us online, thank you for joining us on Facebook. I appreciate your time. For those of you that came in tonight, thank you. Our road construction's doing better. We're getting close. I said that last night too. So I'm excited that someday we are actually gonna be able to turn into our driveway while driving all the way down to Spears. So, but anyways, so tonight I'm really excited about the new author. I read his book a couple months ago, and the first thing I said to Becky was, we gotta get it to the store, and in the meantime, she was already talking about getting Kelly in the store, so we're going. So I was very happy about that. If you have not read this book, you have got to get your hands on it, you've got to get it read, because it is amazing. So, but I would like to probably talk about it more. He is actually originally, and we forgive him for this, a nonfiction book writer. He has 2 nonfiction books you might be interested in. I'll also let him talk about those later tonight. But we're very excited to have Flanagan joining us tonight.
Oh, my goodness. I see new faces and I see familiar faces that I never expected to see. It's just absolutely delightful. I pinch myself. I get to write books and tell stories and people will come listen to me talk more. And it's the books. That's crazy. So good to be here with you all. So this is what I'm thinking for our time tonight is that we would start off with me doing a little bit of a reading from the book, of which I don't have a copy with me. This occurred to me. So if anyone has a copy they want to throw it at me. And because of, oh, I got one. Very kind of you, thank you.
I got one too.
And
Well, I got one of your nonfiction if you want to read from that too.
I'll stay to a closing reading if you want me to. But we'll start with a reading from this. And then I'm going to share a little bit of background with you about how this book came to be and some of the inspiration behind it, because it was actually sort of a long and winding course. And as was mentioned, I'm previously a nonfiction author. And then we'll go ahead and do some question and answer, and I'll answer almost any question you ask. I can't think of one I won't answer, but try me. Let's see. And that could be about me, it could be about the book, it could be about the creation of the book, whatever questions you want to ask. And then I'm actually going to wrap up with a second reading, a very brief reading, sort of a little bonus for you tonight from a forthcoming work, which I'm very excited about as well, that is very related. So I'm excited to see all that. And then we'll be signing in the back here, is that right?
Yes.
So super excited to do that. Now, at the same time, so that's my idea. But one of the things I've learned, I was asked a great question online last night. What's the biggest difference between writing nonfiction and fiction? And I can tell you, for me, the answer immediately comes control. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit in the book, but it feels like with nonfiction, you're sort of in control. You're trying to walk the reader to a certain conclusion in a very meticulous way. But with fiction, for me, it was about learning how to let go of control. How to show up in a scene where I thought I knew what was going to happen, and then to allow those characters to do whatever they wanted. So I'm also okay taking my hands out of this event as well. Does anyone have any burning comments or questions they need to ask before I start talking? I'll give you a minute. I'm a therapist, so I could give you an hour and still feel comfortable with the silence, but we won't do that. That would ruin the night.
That would be bad.
And it'll be more than $24.
And that would be bad on
I know.
Yeah, I never offered a pro bono service, but
Don't
I do have a
we got
question. You guys here, how many of you have read the book?
it's a great question.
Okay, so we got to worry
Four
about
people.
spoilers.
4 people, yeah. And that's why the reading that I'm going to do is from the prologue. My agent, we were at the apprentice gathering in Wichita, Kansas last week, and my lovely agent, Kathy Helmer, so I dedicated the book to. She's walking around and people going, read the first 2 paragraphs, buy it. Read the first 2 paragraphs. If you don't get hooked, I'll buy it back. And we had several people come up to us go, "Hooked." So I'm just going to read you the prologue, read the book, and then we'll take over. Which theoretically I should have practiced. So we'll do this together. The past is behind us, but it is also always within us. Say that again. The past is behind us, but it is also always within us. Which means the past can feel dead and gone one moment, and then in the next, it can be very much living, breathing here. My past came back to life in the form of a nightmare I hadn't dreamed in over 30 years. When I was a child, the nightmare always began the same way, with me standing at a river's edge, watching it rush by, brownly opaque with mud, swollen with storm debris, and foamy with turmoil. It was the kind of cataclysmic river in which a kid can disappear without warning, carried downstream to rot in some unpredictable destination. An old wooden bridge spanned the river. Though it had probably been a feat of humankind at its creation, its glory days were clearly behind it. The railings were gone. Most of the walkway had been torn away by storms long forgotten. The remaining planks were rotted and loose, spaced out, some resting where they were originally placed, some resting at angles. Large gaps in the walkway revealed the boiling waters just a few yards below it. Beyond the bridge, the other side of the river was always cloaked in fog. I had no idea what the fog hid, and yet, with the kind of certainty that can only be called faith, the kind of anticipation that can only be called hope, and the kind of longing that can only be called love, I wanted to find out. So I looked down, preparing to take my first step, and I'd see on my feet a pair of worn out blue sneakers with yellow trim. They were so dirty the yellow looked almost brown and the blue looked almost black. The shoe on my right foot had a hole in front of it, my big toe protruded, covered by a dusty sock. Every night the dream seemed to contain all its previous renditions, so I knew exactly how it was going to end. I knew I would step out onto the bridge and the water would rise, and it would be impossible to escape it. And as it reached me, I would silently scream myself awake. However, I also knew I'd step out onto the bridge anyway, yearning so much for the opposite shore that I was willing to endure the familiar terror at least one more time. Sometime around middle school, the dream seemed to die. I went to sleep one night and it didn't go with me. Weeks passed, no nightmare. Then months passed, then years. And somewhere along the way, I forgot about that old nightmare altogether. It turns out, though, it hadn't died. It had simply gone dormant. Or maybe it had died, and almost 3 decades later, on the cusp of my 40th birthday, it was resurrected. I don't think the future is ever predetermined, but I do think our futures are eventually determined by what we do with these moments of resurrection, especially when such moments cluster together, forming a sort of bridge in the middle of our life. One we may cross to new ground, or one we may turn back from, retreading the ground from which we came. My bridge was made of that old nightmare. It was also made of a secret I kept from everyone so long I eventually began to keep it from myself. And a secret that was kept from me for so long I never knew it existed. My bridge was made of a bunch of lost loved ones who came to life again within the magic of memory and the mystery of imagination. It was made of a God I once loved who went silent, and then one day started speaking to me again through those beloved ghosts of mine. In the Bible, Jesus dies on a Friday, and there's a lot of talk about that. Then he's resurrected on a Sunday, and there's even more talk about that. No one talks much about Saturday, though. Death and resurrection. No one talks much about the end that bridges the two. Sometimes, though, all of life can begin to feel like an and. Every day can start to feel like the Saturday between what happened to you and what you will or will not do with it. And once you recognize your bridge for what it is, you have to decide whether you'll cross it with no guarantee of surviving the passage. Just the merest of hopes that it will deliver you to more graceful ground. It took me a long time to recognize my hand, my bridge, my Saturday for what it was. Too long. It began with a leg in my lap more than a decade before the nightmare resumed. My name is Elijah Campbell, and this is the story of my hiding.
That's fine.
You guys,
Yeah, better.
thank you. Turns out I remember that. I've revised it a few times. Oh my goodness. So as I was thinking about what to say tonight, I thought, I just want to tell you the story. I want to tell you the story behind the story. How did this book come to be? And so I thought I'd start when I was about 2 years. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to go back that far. I only have so much time. About 8 years, actually. about 8 years ago, well, 10 years ago, I started blogging. And I had some success with blogging early on. I started doing it at just the right time, and I had several blog posts go viral. And with about my third viral blog post, what was it called? Words from a Father to His Daughter from the Makeup Aisle. Went really viral. I was in my office one day and I got a call from NBC. They said, "We'd like you to come on this station." And that was a wild experience. For like everybody, I mean, it seemed like everybody had read that blog post. We were flying into New York City, and the woman next to me on the plane said, "So what are you flying into New York for?" And I said, "Well, going to the Today Show. I wrote this letter to my daughter." She said, "You're the one who wrote the letter to my daughter?" And I'm like, "This is crazy." At 15 minutes. So that presented me with an interesting moment in my life. I grew up in a small town in central Illinois. And as I talked about in my first book, Lovable, I came out of that childhood with a sense of shame, a sense of not being good enough, that I would sort of describe in this way: I'm not interested. I'm just not interested. This is, by the way, a particularly vulnerable form of shame to have for a public speaker and a public writer. I'm not interesting enough. I'm watching for every Blaze eye. Please pretend. So I'm not interesting enough. And well, when you live in Dixon, Illinois, if you think what's inside of you isn't interesting enough to be loved, you certainly don't think you're going to find it in Dixon, Illinois. It's not a particularly interesting or significant place. So I spent years trying to find my way out of Dixon to bigger towns, to bigger cities, to more significant accomplishments, right? And here I'm on the Today Show. I'm in the biggest of cities, the Big Apple, right? And I'm doing the most significant of things. I'm on the orange couch on the Today Show. And that presents you with a very interesting moment in your life. It's like this midlife moment, right? Where it's like, okay, everything I've been doing for the first half of my life is supposed to completely satisfy me, right? Completely take away all that shame. Well, I'm home from the Today Show, but it didn't quite work. Did anyone relate to that? And that midlife moment, in my mind, this is what happens. We either turn it into a crisis or a wait, right? We turn it into a crisis if we say, well, all that stuff I did to try to feel completely satisfied with my life, it didn't quite work. Maybe I'll do more of it, right? So I thought money was going to make me feel significant and satisfied. It didn't quite get me there, so let's make more money, right? Or I thought that my relationships were going to do it for me. I'm not quite satisfied, so let's divorce this one and find a different one. Or I thought my toys was a big one for me. I thought my toys were going to make me feel satisfied and significant. So let's get rid of that card and be great. See the crisis starting to happen, right? And the question is, are we going to do something different? Instead of doing the same thing and doubling down on those things, are we going to actually show up to our lives and find a new way to relate to our lives? And so my wife and I decided to do something different at that moment. She was a tenured professor of psychology at Wheaton College. But she was feeling the ache of teaching young people to do the very thing that she'd been wanting to do for years, which is provide direct service to kids who are under-resourced and families who didn't have a lot of resources. And I was feeling the temptation to keep speeding up and searching for the spotlight. And I just wanted to write books and was more aware than ever that I was happiest actually when I was going for a quiet walk in the woods. So after all those years of trying to get out of Dixon, Illinois, we moved back to Dixon. My wife quit her job at Wheaton College, and we moved back to Dixon, Illinois with our 3 kids. Something really wild happened after returning there. Sort of realized that that's where my soul has always felt most calm. My ego, that part of me looking for significance and everything else, thought it needed to get out of Dixon, but my soul felt more at home in Dixon than anywhere else in the world. It's just lovely awakening for me. So something started to happen in the first couple of years back at Dixon. And one of the things that started to happen was I started to get this idea for an album. And the idea was this clinical psychologist who keeps doubling down, right? Turning his midlife moment into a crisis and gets himself in all sorts of trouble. I wasn't sure what kind of trouble, but I thought maybe an affair. I was going to tell him she's leaving him and she's going to go back to live with her parents in this little town in the middle of nowhere. And if he wanted her, he'd have to follow her. So he follows her back to this little town in the middle of nowhere. And he doesn't have a lot of respect for people, and he's been chasing big things, and just small town, small people, right? But he has to make a living, so he starts seeing clients in this small town, and the clients start to feel him, as he gets to know them, and he gets to know their ordinary life. He gets to know the small place in which they live, and the idea was that he had 8 clients he would get to know over the course of the book, and each of them would represent one of the Beatitudes, not explicitly, but kind of in the writer's mind. Because I believe the Beatitudes are one of the most powerful teachings we have for transformation. Finding peace and finding transformation in the small things, and in the little things, in the heart of things. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. Except I had just signed a contract with University Press, 2 books, very exciting and very unusual, right? 2 nonfiction books. So I'm thinking, got to finish writing through the pages, right? And then I got to publish it. And I'm going to have to propose and write a second nonfiction book. So this novel is at least 7 years down the road, probably, hopefully, if I ever get to think about it. So I just was always there, sort of filed it away. It was called The Shrinking Life. Two meanings, The Shrinking Life and also The Shrinking. And so I published True Companions, this book about relationships. It's totally worth full price. It's about how to take these 3 experiences: loneliness, defensiveness, and distractibility, that usually sort of cause problems in relationships, and repurpose them for deep connection and lifelong companionship. I loved writing. But it was about time for True Companions to come out, so it was time to start proposing that second book of the contract. Right? And I remember sitting around one afternoon, I was in my backyard, I was talking to Kathy, my agent. She's like, "What do you think?" I keep getting this image of a bridge, that we sort of start out on this side of a raging river of life. And we spend a lot of time treading this ground, but there's this more graceful ground on the other side of the river. But very few of us want to cross that bridge and do the work of crossing that bridge to get to that graceful ground. So we just sort of keep walking over here doing the same things. I just keep getting this image. And I'm thinking like the book could be broken into 8 parts. I'm still stuck on the Beatitudes, right? 1 for each Beatitude. And these Beatitudes sort of walk us across the bridge to this more graceful ground on the other side. And then Kathy asked her first question. Well, what if the Beatitudes weren't ideas, but they were people? What if you personified them? And I was like, well, Kathy, it's a nonfiction book. Like, that's weird. She's like, well, just sit with it. Okay. So I sit with it for about a month. How could you turn the Beatitudes into people in a nonfiction book? Well, I could think of 8 lost loved ones who, in my memory and in my mind, represent one of those Beatitudes. And I could have conversations with them over the course of the book, and those conversations could walk me across that bridge. Or it might be transformed by the book I'm writing, right? And so I came back to her with that idea, and she said, "I love it. I think it's very intriguing. It's very unusual. Who knows what they're going to say?" So we pitched a nonfiction book to IVP that was originally titled This Graceful Grounds. And the wonderful folks at University Press immediately came back and said, "We think this would be better as fiction." And I'm amazed by how we resist doing the things we really want to do in life. It is remarkable, because at that point I should have been like, okay, I don't want to write a novel forever. It's got Beatitudes in it. It's got, yes. My reaction instead was, I must have been unclear in my proposal. Let me revise that nonfiction proposal and propose it again. So we did it again, and the title of that nonfiction proposal was School of Grace, Life Being a School of Grace. And IDP came back again and said, "We think this would be better as fiction." And so I had a call scheduled with Kathy, and I said, "Like, tell me about that. Like, what are we going to do with this?" And I'm still thinking we're going to have to scrap the proposal and come up with something else. And she said, "Well, think about like a situational fiction, like." Maybe it's one day in a therapist's office. And these 8 people come through his office. Just sort of sit with that for a while. So I sat with that for about another month, and I came back to Kathy and I said, "If I'm going to write fiction, I have to do it. I've got to write a novel. I don't think I can do a situational fiction. I have to it has to be a character-driven piece. That's what I would expect." And she said, you know, Kelly, most authors have about 3 or 4 novels in the drawer before they ever publish a novel. And I was like, thank you for that, Kathy. You never fail to tell me the truth, which I appreciate about you. She said, well, go for it. And University Press gave us all sorts of leeway. They just said, yeah, do play with this and come back when you have additional thoughts. So I spent a couple of months beginning to write. First of all, learning about story, learning about novels, right? And then beginning to do so. And I sent it to Kathy probably about 20% of the way done. Kathy got back right away. She said, wow, like these characters are alive. Keep going, keep going. But she said, you know that idea we had about the Beatitudes? It feels to me like the story is becoming bigger than that idea. And if at some point in your writing you need to abandon the Beatitudes, just let the story take you where it wants to go, do it. And I remember the scene where that happened, and I'm not going to spoil it. I'll just say that the main character, Ellie, comes out of a tough situation in which he remembers something. And in my mind, the next scene was that he's going to go speak with his grandmother. It's going to be the next scene. And so I sat down the morning where I was going to write that scene. And I was like, there's no way he's walking out of what he just went through. And he's going to go now have another tough conversation. He's going to go lick his wound somewhere. He needs to recover. And so he goes out in the book, he goes off to a park instead of the picnic table to recover. And that's really when the book started to become its own sort of creation, which was so much fun. It's when the themes of the book started to emerge. This idea that at the beginning of all healing is unhiding, but we can't speak it, we can't transform it. That we really can't let go of our, it's in us, right? We can't let go of our past, but we can learn to dialogue with it. And that can be healing and transformative. So those themes started to emerge for me, and something really wild started to happen for me. I realized that one of the midlife transformations that I was going through in the process of writing, starting to let go of control. That dawned on me one day, if I can't let go of control of the characters in my book, how might I be controlling the characters in my life? Like that probably isn't terribly pleasant for people I'm in relationships with. One of the mantras for me for the last couple of years, and this is an interesting mantra for somebody who's in healing professions, is people can't change, but you can't change them. Right? And ironically, so you give people that freedom, change starts to happen. So this is a transformation that I started to go through over the course of writing the rest of the book. I will tell you, there's one scene that I guess I could say I controlled, never changed the whole time. I was on a stationary bike one morning in my basement, and I was listening to a song called The Wild by Mumford and Sons. And it was the most bizarre experience. All of a sudden, the final scene of the book was there, completely whole, and I could see it happening to the beat of the song. Like when there was this tempo shift, this would happen, and this character would do this. So by the time I finally got to write that final scene, it's like I lived it over and over again in my head so many times that I sort of spit it out. It was a lot of fun. So I'll tell you one final story, and then we can go into question and answer. Talk about this idea of letting go of control. I mentioned at the beginning, right? In fiction, I have to let go of control of characters do what they want to do. I have to let go of control of the people in my life. Just moved my oldest son, 19 years old, down to the city to chase a career in stand-up comedy and live on his own. And it was like the last 2 weeks have been spiritual discipline of letting go of control. I got to see him last night. It's in one piece. So I finished the manuscript, sent it off to Kathy. I gave it to my wife to read, and that Friday I went for a walk in the park with one of my best buddies, and he said, I said, hey, I finished that manuscript. And he said, oh, did you send it to your publisher yet? I go, no, it's my agent, gave it to Kelly. My wife's name's also Kelly. But I just don't think fiction is right for me right now. I think I'm just going to put it in the drawer, and I want to publish a nonfiction book about following our passions. can you publish a book about following your passion if you're not following your passion? You're writing a novel, buddy. And I was like, we resist things that we dream about. It's scary to chase those. But here we are. I felt very, I just gotta say, I feel emotion while I'm up and share this with all. It's just such a blessing to get to be able to do what I do and have you guys be here for it. So thank you for being here for it, and just open up the space for questions and answers. Anybody chopping at the bit, and if not, I can promise them. I'll warn you. Yeah, so last night, like I said, I went down to the city to see the agent. Oh, Chicago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's about
The city.
Is there another?
My grandson went to New York.
Yeah, that's actually the city. We have like a little hang complex. So I live about an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half, yes, the city. But he's been dreaming of going there for years, become a comedian. Last night I went down to see him for the first time after not seeing him in 2 weeks. We had tacos and we were walking out of the taco place and I said, hey, I meant to post today this author event tonight. And would you be willing to answer a question for me? And we'll record it and put it up on all the social media platforms. And he's like, sure. We're walking out and he goes, oh, what question? And I said, well, I'm wondering, like, if you were to go to an author event, what's the question you want the author to answer? You know, and he goes, oh, I got it. That's fast. So his question was, he said, when I'm listening to a given book or reading a given book or listening to a piece of music, I can tell if I know if it's going to be a hit or not. And he actually is very gifted at this. He picks authors and musicians ahead of time. Since he goes, at what point in the creative process does the creator know it's going to be a hit? I see one creator that's in the audience, right? That's a great question. And the answer is that I would never presume to know. There are so many variables that go on between the creation and the reception, right? That are just, again, out of your control. But I thought, what is the point at which a piece becomes special? Whether it's a blog post or a book or whatever. And I really, for me, it's when the piece crosses sort of this line from being a creative experience to a spiritual experience, in the sense that it feels like I'm co-collaborating, that it's sort of being written through me. And I know that because it's surprising. Like I had no idea that was going to happen today. I looked at my Google Chrome tabs, all the searches I'd done after a writing session yesterday. And I'm like, I didn't know I'd be searching any of those things today, right? And it was just such a symbol of specialness of it. So I know it's become special and it's starting to surprise me as well. I guess this would be my answer to it, and then I'll let the heads take care of themselves.
I hope this question sounds okay. It sounds to me as if, as a writer, you put yourself in this new work. And when you talk about control and resistance, would you say that as you were writing, in some instances in this, you're writing about yourself or things you have felt and experienced?
Yes.
And in line with that, you're talking about this crossing over, and I found that to be kind of interesting. You were talking about the spiritual side of it and being, I guess, including the maker in this. I thought that was really pertinent. And I was thinking, as a writer writes a book, I'm looking at from my point of view. As we read, I love when I think an author is being real. That's the best way I know how to say it. Sincere, real. There are a lot of things that I like to read, but I love something, there was a speaker here last night, two women, two authors, and I love something that one of them said. That when she writes, she cries sometimes. That really kind of touched my heartstrings. It's often when I read, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, somewhere in the book, I'm crying about it. So I wonder, it sounds to me like in the writing of this, you sort of put a little bit of your heart and soul into this that was the real you. And that crossing over into letting go of the control, the resistance, that's speaking to my heart as I hear you talk. So I'm not quite sure what exactly I'm asking you, but did you, I guess, put yourself in this and you're really pouring through your own feelings, experiences. And if you said you're a therapist, correct?
Yes.
So then I would think that you probably want to write so that those reading it can be helped to overcome some of maybe what you are portraying in this story. Am I correct?
Thank you for that. I'll try to remember all the things you just made.
I tried hard to work this, so it'll be okay.
The first thing I would say is that a client of mine is actually responsible for me starting to write. Back in 2011, he looked at me and he said, you're really helping me. It's a shame you only get to help 30 people at cops. What do you mean? There's gotta be some way to communicate more to people about what you do and your ideas. I started blogging about 2 months later. So definitely the motivation from the beginning has been to write things that help people heal and transform. Was the word you used to encourage or and so yeah, that is a big motivation. I have I'll be hosting a retreat out in Utah next a couple of weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
And we've become good friends with folks who are hosting us at their ranch. And she texted me one day and she said, "Hey, I'm having a hard time reading your book. It feels really real. And are you and Kelly okay?" And I told her, I said, first of all, huge compliment, thank you, that feels so real. But none of these things that happened to me, almost none of the actual events in the book have happened to me. The setting of the book is very much inspired by Dixon. Bradford's Ferry, the town in the book, is sort of, I think of it as like this mirror image of Dixon, it's sort of parallel plane, but in terms of the facts of the story, the things happening on stage within the stage setting, that's imagination. But the themes, yeah, putting myself into that. What's interesting, what's funny to me is so Ellie is a really broken character. He's a broken character. He's got a lot of healing to do. And people are like, "You're Ellie, aren't you? Ellie, you didn't have to do that." But you like Ellie, like, you're Ellie, aren't you? And I'm like, I wrote Father to the wise old sage. Like he came out of me as well. So why do you choose Ellie? But I think that's part of the mystery, right? Is they're all coming out of it. And so to some extent, they all have to reflect parts of you. But to some extent, they're also saying things that never planned on them doing. So it's this sort of mystery, this boundary land, mysterious place, which is part of what makes it so much fun. As far as crying, with fiction, I realized I've got a system. No matter how much I've written, I always show up to the next day thinking there's no way I'll be able to write today. Like it just won't come. So I've got a system now. I go back always and revise previous day's work. Mostly to remind myself that I can do this and go, oh, it's not terrible. Okay, so now I just gotta flow into today's writing too. One thing I've noticed is that I don't cry a lot during the first draft, but when I'm revising, when I read it from the reader's perspective, it gets, that just happened yesterday. So it's almost like you can't feel it while it's coming out, but you can feel it, you get to return to it. For me, it's so.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Could you tell me kind of what your day of,
Try that again.
what your day of writing is like? I mean, are you still doing your practice too, in addition to writing, or? I
Good
mean-
question. Yeah,
And your family, I mean.
yeah. I don't pay any attention to my family.
You don't
That's the next book.
It's right, that's so fun. I've definitely dramatically scaled back my clinical work as my passion. and
You've
vision.
healed them all.
I'm sorry.
You've healed them all, so.
Yeah, they're all everyone in central Illinois.
Yeah, they're-
Probably will get a So, But no, I definitely scaled that back significantly. A friend who called me out on, can't write a book about passion if you're not following your own. We went out to dinner with them in June of 2021. And I said, I need to say something to you guys tonight and you need to hold me accountable. I want to write novels. I want to be an novelist. And so the year and a half since then, or whatever, it's 15, 16 months since then, has included me scaling back a little bit of my professional work, making more space for writing. So right now, gladly, I get to write about 4 mornings a week. And for me, it seems like when the clock ticks to noon, my creativity just goes. It doesn't matter if I wake up at 11, I only get an hour, like at noon, like it's done. So I have to wake up early and get going.
Are you a pantser or plotter?
Say it again, a pantser or a plotter? Like writing by the seat of your pants or plotting? Great question. That's a great question. So I don't know that I've done this long enough to act like I know what I'm doing.
None of
What I'll
us
say
know
is-
you're a pantser.
Well. So what I learned while writing the first one and I'm doing while writing the second one is that I do plot it out all the way through the story. But not into too much detail beyond about the next 6 scenes, because so much changes in 6 scenes. Like there was in the one that I'm working on right now, I got to a point where one of the main characters was supposed to be a golf at college, and she decided not to attend. And it's like, oh, so that's not gonna work anymore, and everything after that's not gonna work. So it's really loose down the road, but the next 6 scenes is pretty. Like I want to be able to sit down in the morning and know the scene that I'm gonna write, and then be surprised at what happens next. So that's how I do it these days. Questions?
So considering that you want to do more novels, and you talked about how it feels different to write fiction and nonfiction with the control level. Do you have thoughts about what you're able to accomplish with fiction as opposed to nonfiction?
That's a great question. So what's interesting too is that with each work, I feel like you get a clearer and clearer sense of why am I doing all this, you know? Like, was it that Lovable was about overcoming our shame and then the rest of them are gonna be about something different, or all of my work really about wrestling with this experience of shame and loneliness that we have as human beings and the ways that we accidentally make both of them worse by trying to, you know, hide ourselves, protect ourselves, and those sorts of things. And so I think the first question is what am I trying to accomplish? And I think at this point, the closest I would describe it as freedom. Freedom from the belief that we need to not wrestle with shame and loneliness, that we're human if we're wrestling with it. It's never going to go away completely. And we can begin to open up about the process of healing from those sorts of things. One of the things that I'm excited about with this book is I got the feedback I would get from Lovable over and over again was, boy, that was really hitting me. I had to just put it down for a week or a month. And I just like, tell them to pick it back up and finish it. They never recommended it to people. And what I hear with this book is that the story just, you feel like you're on a bit of a water slide, just flying through the story, and it's changing something is loosening up within you, something that's sort of like tight and closed. Something's flowing again. And then you can go back and read it a second time to sort of understand what happened, how you were doing it, and to sort of take in some of the nuance around the various conversations. So my hope is that the vehicle of the story actually is perhaps an even more powerful way to accomplish the same things that nonfiction is accomplishing.
you kind of covered this, but you really fleshed out how the process from you moving from it being a nonfiction about the attitudes to where you ended. But I have read the book, so I'm intrigued by how you went from having real conversations to the way you handled the way he interacts and processes things. Because you pro-life does breeding, and you deal with those in a lot of different ways. So did that happen organically, or did you make a conscious decision to change the way he was going to interact with the people in his past and present?
That's a good question. I would say the way it is now is nothing like, nothing like.
Yeah, that's so intriguing to me.
Yeah, nothing like I imagined.
Right.
The beginning, yeah. I gotta
How'd you
tell
get
you,
there?
what's it, how did I
How'd
get
you
there? Well, I mean, lots of revisions, right? I mean, like. So one of the interesting, I guess, pieces sort of behind the scenes is that I was terrified of writing dialogue when I first started writing. You don't have to write much dialogue in nonfiction. It's probably the biggest difference. And so I went as far as I could in the book without there being any dialogue. So originally in the first draft, there was no dialogue in the first 40 pages. And then of course somebody got a hold of it and it was like, but I discovered that I didn't write any dialogue until the first conversation with his grandmother. And someone gave me the feedback that actually, you do dialogue pretty well. So why don't you put it up front? It's like, okay. So then I was able to revisit that scene at the beginning with Ellie and Rebecca. And
So
actually,
yeah, that might have needed some conversation.
yeah, that needed a little conversation. So and it was so much fun to go, oh yeah, I wrote 2 pages worth of summary about that moment. Now I get to just sort of sit and what did they actually say about it? So that was a lot of fun. It was really a lot of fun for me to watch the dream change over the course of the book, and I won't spoil anything.
Yeah.
Right, but the final dream, even when I started writing that, I didn't think it was gonna way that it fits. Yeah, it was one of those fun days, right? It was like, oh, that's cool.
Does your wife write also?
My wife has published 2 textbooks with InterVarsity Press about child development and Christian spirituality. And you should totally buy those 2.
But how will we know which is which?
They don't. They don't. We got an email this week where like, is there no paperwork? We don't know which one you actually completed. I think we've worked in 12 different places together over the course because she's a clinical psychologist as well. So we've been confusing HR departments for 20 years. No one knows. And the TSA, they don't know what's going on.
That's so funny.
So yeah, she's always been my first reader, which is just lovely. So my experience, the first time this book saw other people's eyes was I gave it to her on our trip out to Delaware, car trip 2 summers ago. And I thought she'd read it over the course of the trip. And it was one of the more vulnerable experiences of my life is sitting there. I usually like put some headphones in while we're on this trip. I can put the headphones in. I'm like listening to all the laughs and sniffles of the, what did you just? She was read in one 6-7 hour stretch. That was really brief.
Do you have a release date for the next one?
No, definitely don't. I have to have it in by November 15th.
So maybe.
Yeah, I don't think this hasn't been discussed. So I don't, there's really, 90% of the way done with it hasn't really been talked about. Would you like to hear?
Let's say one.
Yeah.
So one of, the most recent review on Goodreads from one of the early readers, they all just are amazing. I'm grateful. There's people just rooting for it now, and I'm so grateful. But this one got me. This is from Patsy. Absolutely love this book. I am hoping this will be the first of the Bradford's Fairy series. I am invested in the characters and hope to hear the stories of Benjamin, Father Lou, Rebecca, etc., etc. I hope we get to experience Sarah growing up. I'm gonna make sure there's no spoilers here. Why did Gus choose to become a teacher rather than a writer himself? Did Jeff always want to help people? Definitely invested. Not since Mitford have I raced to get back quickly to Bradford's Ferry. I am so proud of Ellie for doing hard work, love, belonging, purpose. Thank you for the hours of work reporting this fabulous story. Loved it. So the fact that the readers are falling in love, not just with the characters, but with Brad, like the whole cast of Bradford's Ferry, has so fallen in love with this the town.
Is that a sequel to this one? Or is this is gonna be a.
So the second book that I'm working on will be a sequel in the sense that it's a sequel for the town.
Okay,
And there will be some overlapping characters, but not Ellie necessarily. I will tell you, with what Ellie's working on in this one, you get excerpts from it, the second one.
okay.
Characters, there was a lot of fun with that. So here is, should I hear that prologue to the,
Sure.
well, I'm reading to you. All right, this one makes me nervous. The river that runs through Bradford's Ferry is the Sauconut River. The body surfaced in the Sauconut River on a 4th of July morning, so humid, the boundary between river and air seemed irrelevant. It was discovered by a kid everyone in Bradford's Ferry called Joe 3, because he was the third in a line of Josephs. His father, Joey Jr., owned the town's most popular breakfast food. Joe 3 and his cousin Robbie had woken up early to go fishing, not to beat the heat, but to finish their fishing before the holiday parade, which had started at 10 a.m. every 4th for as long as anyone could remember. They planned to lunch on Tootsie Rolls and Jolly Ranchers tossed on hot pavement. The city dock was in close proximity to the parade route for two 12-year-olds with summertime perfection. The perfection ended right around the time Joe 3 told Robbie he, quote, must have hooked some junk on the bottom. Her name was Samantha Struthers. She'd been reported missing by her husband Daniel on the evening of July 1st. The Bradford's Ferry Police Department was small but well respected. However, for several reasons, they called her a missing person and conducted only a cursory search for her in places around town where someone might be likely to have followed her and become stranded. The first reason was there hadn't been a murder, kidnapping, or anything resembling either at Bradford's Ferry since back when the 4th of July parade was marched in the afternoon. Second, Dan wasn't the easiest guy to get along with, and most people could imagine needing an unannounced break from him for a day or two. And last but not least, Sam Struthers was a sweetheart. It was impossible to imagine anyone wanting to harm her. In the 2+ days since she'd been reported missing, neither the heat nor the water had served her well. Joe 3 was known to be curious about pretty much everything, including heavy, unseen objects at the bottom of the river. He gave his rod a hard pull, hoping his line wouldn't break, and imagined an old rubber boot laden with mud or a long-lost gas can filled with river water. He saw her hair first, confused it for some kind of river grass no one had ever told him about. Then slowly the rest of her caught up with the top of her head, and her face tilted toward the sky, and for a moment he took in what nature could do to a body once the soul is evacuated. He tried to say Robbie's name, but leaned over the dock and expelled some half-digested Pop-Tarts into the socket up instead. That was the morning the town's police chief, William Akers, launched the first possible murder investigation of his painstakingly quiet career. It was also the morning Caleb Hamilton and his daughter Lizzie moved to town. Caleb fishing for his very soul, hoping to hook it and tuck it back to the surface of himself, while Lizzie's soul was aspirating pain and sinking slowly into her depths. Indeed, it was the morning the whole town would begin to tug on something at the bottom of itself, entirely unaware of what would eventually float to the surface.
Sounds good.
And I love William and Lizzie, Caleb, just as much as I love Elijah, Rebecca, or Gus, and everybody else. So,
What state is this supposed to be in? Is this in Illinois?
yeah, it's I think pretty explicitly it's central Illinois. It's similar to this. What's that? And what do we do next? Do you have more questions?
That was my first question.
Yeah.
And you didn't know what we asked you to sing. So
It was a long time ago. The Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, "Kelly, if you don't want to do this to people anymore, you don't have to. I don't even sing in church." You just put everybody out there misery, dude. Yeah, I just started. Yeah, I let other people do this.
the note is just a suggestion. You don't have to actually use the part of that. So, thank you everybody for joining us online also. Kelly is actually going to be back and signing books, so if you do think of a question, please feel free to ask it at that time. We appreciate you guys coming out on Friday night. This was fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very interesting to hear. What do you have to say about your book?
Thank you to the Cross Books for having me here and creating this opportunity to connect everyone.
Will you stay and come back next time?
Are you a comedian like your son?
You can say no. So,
I would say no.
dad jokes, that's it.
So thank you again, and we'll see you again soon.